From Los Angeles, this is the Adult Swim podcast, Rick and Morty Companion Edition. I'm Matt Harrigan. We're talking about Rick and Morty number 403, One Crew Over the Crewcoo's Morty. If you haven't watched this episode yet, you might want to watch it first. You might not. I chatted with some folks who made this episode, including Brian Newton, who directed it, and Katie Delaney, who wrote it. We'll also hear from character designer Elisa Phillips, color designer Corey Brooks, supervising director Wes Archer, background designer Tommy Scott, and music composer Ryan Elder. Here we go with Rick and Morty number 403, One Crew Over the Crewcoo's Morty.
Hi, I'm Brian Newton. I'm one of the episode directors for Rick and Morty Season 4.
What's your history with the show?
So I came onto the show on the pilot episode. I was a storyboard artist and assistant director. Justin needed help to actually, produce an animated show, and he and I worked together briefly on a community animation with Harmon. So when I came on the show, basically we had a script and almost like a rough storyboard, and my first contribution to the show is when Rick shows up and helps Morty with his bully problem, named by Frank. That was like one of the first sequences I did. Ever since then, I've been on the show directing 8 episodes.
Is that the most of any director?
Yes, I'm the longest serving.
What is it about you that makes you the most longest serving director, do you think?
I can tolerate a lot of bullshit.
Like what?
Oh, so I've been on since the beginning. Like, I knew Justin before going into it.
Yeah.
So I've been, even at that point, I had like 10 years animation experience.
What's your history?
So I'm born and raised in Los Angeles. I went to school at Otis College of Art, and immediately thereafter got to start working in animation in 2004. But like Rick and Morty was the first time I actually got to direct, because I've been storyboarding before then. So when season 1 got picked up, Justin gave me the opportunity to direct, and my first episode was the Meesick episode. I only got lucky enough to be bored on that episode, but my favorite episode that season was the Ricksty Minutes. We got to put a lot of fun into that one because we've talked about in the behind the scenes, but for that episode, all we had was audio track from the different bits, and as board artists, we got to kind of design and construct kind of the concepts we were listening to, and that one gave us the most creative freedom as far as board artists for the show is concerned. And I've been asked back every season for 2, 3, and 4. So
you can tolerate a lot of bullshit.
Mm-hmm.
What kind of bullshit comes down for a director?
So this one's fun. Season 1, everyone remembers like the potion episode, Rick Potion number 9.
Right.
That was, I think, originally the 3rd in our production, but because the design was so heavy on that episode, like I think there were literally like 200 new characters and assets, because every time the characters literally transformed into mantises and then transformed into Cronenberg monsters, those are new designs which have to be built. On average, even on a big show, even something akin to The Simpsons, you're only dealing with like new characters periodically and only like 15, 20. Rick and Morty's pushing hundreds for like new episodes. So because of like the size of an episode like that, things get pushed way later, or things are just more challenging than like what production may have realized. So it gets a little hairy for our production. So if anyone's complaining about, oh, why is the show taking so long to produce? Well, part of that is, you do an episode where there's a giant convention of aliens, and each new alien's unique, and some aren't unique, and you gotta do massive crowds, and then they get controlled by a hive bot, and takes control of them, and then they break down that convention, and then destroy a whole new planet filled with all new unique aliens.
Let's talk about this episode. Walk me through the evolution of, I guess we're calling it the Heist. Heist? One Flew Over the Crewcoo's Morty. Right. First of all, how does that name come by?
I have no clue. So real talk is that we on the script will get an episode. For example, the Tiny Rick episode, which was Big Trouble in Little Sanchez, was just called Tiny Rick. And I don't even know what the full title is going to be until like after they're animated and once they get close to the air. So we initially got the pitch for this was it's Dan's kind of griping about heist movies. I think there was a little while ago on his podcast, Harmontown, him griping about the Now You See Me movies, how like they're stupid. I've heard the rant once, so I
Is
kind of get the gist
Harmontown
of it.
a genesis for a lot of Rick and Morty
Yes.
content?
I mean, even like one of the first episodes I worked on, which was Lawnmower Dog, how like Inception's stupid, no one should like this movie, was basically the genesis for that episode. So this one is about like heist movies, Ocean's 11. Dan wanted to like basically deconstruct and shit on heist movies.
So how much did you study these movies that you reference?
Yeah, usually if I know the references pretty well, I'll just board straight into it because like it's like second nature. Like it's like, hey, reference Star Wars. Like, yeah, I can do Star Wars. But for this, I did rewatch like the first Ocean's 11 movie. And I wanted to see Ocean's 8, but I didn't get a chance to see it. Uh, and I've never seen the Now You See Me movies. But when we were talking about like doing that Soderbergh style with like the vignettes of different scenes going on in the panels in between, it's like, okay, I already know that kind of vignette style. And rewatching those movies to see kind of like techniques they do on how when they cut and when they edit and how they have different interlay together. For example, you'll usually have a background that's like two backgrounds that are similar, and then you do a close in of like a specific action while there's like a different action on top of it. So if like a character is walking through the scene and they pick up like a specific item from a table, and it's like a quick snatch that if you didn't cut in, you completely miss. You'd have that going on one panel, and then on the second panel that show up, you have the quick cut in, and maybe like freeze on that while your eyes supposed to dart back to either the previous panel or a third new panel of the action continuing of what that item was going to be used for. It's kind of like all the techniques you usually use on boarding a sequence or detailing a sequence, like all the shots, are now played on top of each other instead of like in a linear sequence.
So is this a hard one to make? Is this one of the... Where does this stack up?
Every season's been hard, but this one's been specifically hard. Yes,
Why?
This was a more challenging one. Mainly on the background and boarding end because of the nature of all these aliens and all these different races running around like collecting stuff when they get mind controlled by the Heistatron robot. That sequence is particularly difficult, and detailing a lot of these vignettes as they're going through was a bit of a challenge to do in Storybook Pro. I'm sure it was even more challenging for the animators. This episode specifically, I was told by production, has over 900 assets. And assets include backgrounds, characters, and props.
What do they average?
Oh, average on a normal show, not a Rick and Morty show,
Yeah, how about
would be maybe about 12. On Rick and Morty, like I said earlier, sometimes we push into the 200s, but even 900 is ridiculous.
Will they be reused, repurposed?
Not on this show. You would think. Even on this one episode, I think we only the only reuse I can definitely remember is the garage for when Rick is building the Heistatron and they're laying out their plans. And there's one shot of a grocery store, which I think was used in Morty's Mind Blowers, or another episode from season 3. It's at the end when I think it's Hephaestus goes to... When they're doing a random action, he goes on top of a grocery store. The exterior was reused. Everything else in this episode is completely new.
What are some things maybe that you're proud of, some of these scenes?
I think one of my favorite bits from this episode is the Heistatron robot when he's doing his little heist on that alien world to steal the planet's core. That's just funny to me. I tried to keep with I think Eugene, the board artist, was the one who helped me on this one. He did this sequence. The scale of Heistatron versus this planet that he's heisting, where the size of the pizza and like the size of the listening devices. I think each time I make sure to scale it up per like something that's fairly like we'd understand. So if I remember, the listening device might be the size of Los Angeles, while the pizza might be the size of Texas. I try to keep everything in scale. Like, okay, that's how big this thing is. So if you're dropping a pizza box on this planet, it's literally like crushing Texas. Another thing I found fun was I've actually been to Netflix before and seen their offices here in California on Sunset. And I did model the backgrounds based on what their offices look like. So that's also really funny to me. I'm just like, yeah, I've just been there recently, so I kind of know what their office looks like.
Where does this sit in the canon in your mind? You've seen it all from the very beginning. What's this season like? Is it an evolution of other seasons? Is it?
It's
How does it
even
feel?
compared to like season 3, it's probably the most Harmon season possible.
Why?
Dan
What does that
Harmon
mean?
is fully involved. We have him at every stage of production now. Like he's in the script phase. He's in the what was I gonna say? He's in the script phase for sure. He's in the animatic phase, so he's involved in a lot of the early cuts of it. And like that can usually be pretty good. Sometimes it hurts us. The one notable exception when Dan comes in and like really fixes something or adds his 2 cents that makes it better.
Season 4, then, in a nutshell, compared to previous seasons.
It's hard. I'm too close to it. There's some real good gems on it, but none of them are the ones I directed. Because again, I'm never happy. All right. So season 3 has some fantastic episodes. I've been saying from the get-go that Pickle Rick is like one of the greatest episodes of the entire show. But this one, I'd say consistently this season's better than season 3. And again, I'm hard on myself. Vindicators is actually my least favorite episode, and I directed it. So that's just me personally. So I'll tell you what I'll tell you straight. It's that this season is consistently better than season 3.
Here's Katie Delaney, who wrote the episode.
It was my first job as a writer, so
Wow.
yeah. But there were a lot of us staff writers. You'll see on the credits this year. There's I think 5 or 6 staff writers.
What's your background? Walk us into this.
Sure. Well, as far as TV goes, I've been working as an assistant. Had been working as an assistant for like 4-ish years. I started working on a Tim Allen sitcom called Last Man Standing. Worked on a Showtime show called Kidding, starring Jim Carrey, as the same job, a writer's assistant, working in the writer's room. And then when I was working on that show, I got hired on Rick and Morty as a writer.
From a writer's assistant to a writer.
It's a dream.
How does that work? You had a SPAC? Or?
Yeah, so yeah, I wrote a pilot, and first I got agents who helped me shop it around and show it to people, and Mike McMahon here saw my pilot and read it, and I was asked to submit 2 cold opens that I wrote for Rick and Morty. My agents called me and told me I got it while I was on my way to work at Kidding, and I like wept, and it was a whole like classic thing.
Yeah.
Like, didn't think I would have tears, but when you've been working on it for a while, and Rick and Morty was one of my favorite shows, never ever would consider that I had a shot.
You didn't think you were going to get it. You just submitted.
No. And I mean, even being asked to submit threw me for such a loop. I had no idea
Did you stress
that
about
I was like in this world. Like you don't think you watch TV and it feels so separate from you, and then all of a sudden you're a part of it. It's insane.
Yeah.
So yeah, that was crazy. That was like a really cool day. And then I had to show up work crying, and then people were like, "What's up? Why are you crying?" And then I had to say, "Well, I have to leave this job in 2 days because I start writing on Rick and Morty on Monday." So that was a whole other weepy affair.
How did those writers feel about you getting this writer job?
Well, Cody Heller, Dan's fiance, writes on Kidding.
Oh.
So that was a connection there. So she actually knew about it already. So when I showed up crying and she saw me, she knew why, because Dan had told her that I was going to be hired. But everyone was super supportive.
Cool.
It was great. It didn't have to be anything, any bad vibes at all. It was
Was
great.
Heist your first script?
Yeah.
Walk us through that process.
Like we start talking about it for a while before it becomes one writer's assignment. So we just had like the seed of an idea in the room about, what can we parody? We started talking about heist movies, and then someone had a pitch that Rick would probably only like the parts of heist movies where they put the crew together. Like he thinks that's the only cool part. And then from there it grew to maybe Rick becomes addicted to setting up crew. He only wants to complete a heist so that he can set up the crew. So then he starts inventing heists just to get the perfect crew together for it. And then that kind of spins out of control, and he can't make crews fast enough. And he builds a crew robot to make all of his crews for him. And then when it really sort of took off as a structure for an episode was that this crew robot that is assembling crews for Rick becomes so powerful that it assimilates Rick and Morty into one of his own crews, and they sort of like wake up in a crew cube, which is like this self-sufficient spaceship that's going around and robbing all, which is in the episode now, but in sort of a different way, is heisting all these planets of like all of their natural resources, and Rick and Morty have jobs on the cube, and Rick's kind of into it, and Morty's the one who has to sort of remind him that this isn't him, and he created this monster and they have to destroy it. So yeah, that's what I went off with.
So you went off and wrote a draft, take a couple weeks?
Yeah, I think it took a week. Yeah.
Come back
It's
with a
pretty
draft?
standard. Came back with a draft.
Anxious to present your first draft?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's very nerve-wracking, although something really nice about the season that I worked on is that so many of us were green writers, as you know, 5 or 6 staff writers, and we had gotten a lot of practice at showing each other our writing. So, you know, the first couple weeks of being in the room, we threw any idea that we had, big or small, on the wall. And by the end of the first week, there were like hundreds of ideas, you know, from like Morty wants to buy a chair to like, you know, planet made of jello, like really dumb stuff, but all, you know, whatever you wanted to pitch would go up on the wall. And then that became a list of things that we could then grab from all season long, which we did. And this process that we went through to see if ideas had any juice is that we would sort of like drawn from a hat, essentially. Yeah, it was randomized. We would get one of these pitches and be assigned for like an hour or 2 hours, go write a scene of this idea. And totally based on like a 5-word pitch. I would go off and write Morty gets a vampire girlfriend or whatever. And you can choose to write the cold open of that episode. Any scene that you see of that happening, you can take it anywhere you want. And then we would come back and read those. And if any of them felt like they could be expanded or they were, you know, got everybody laughing, then that's what we would chase.
So that was the purpose?
Yeah.
To see if there was a seed there?
Yeah, exactly.
And did those turn into episodes?
Yeah, sure. Some of them probably did. I think Snakes, the Rattlestar.
Yeah, Rattlestar
Galactica, I believe, came from one of those. I mean, it definitely proved useful. And for me personally as a writer, it's such a treat because being told you have an hour to write a scene takes the pressure off. Like, you can just be goofy and dumb. You have an hour to write it. Everyone knows that. Everyone had the same amount of time. So if you got 3 pages, 5 pages, like, that's a feat in itself. And everyone was so kind to each other about that because we were all doing it together. And this show is so forgiving about, you know, this isn't like Veep where I imagine you have to be very precise and like know about the government and stuff. Like, this show is just such an open world that I found myself writing more to like things that I know about that I knew I could be funny about and still fit them into the world of Rick and Morty. So, do
you know a lot about the sort of sci-fi realm?
No.
And the family dynamic?
Right, that was more my area. Like, that's when I got hired in the show, I was like, what are they thinking? Because I don't know anything about science fiction. Like, it's like, obviously I've seen science fiction films and I can maybe as well as someone else say, wouldn't it be crazy if there was a planet just like Earth and everyone did the same thing but like everything was a little bit different? Like, that's a science fiction idea. But the actual I realized when we got into the room that I have seen probably 1/16 of the amount or fewer of you know, science fiction films, or like I've never seen an episode of Star Trek. Like, there were many missing things like that for me that it seems like a lot of the other writers in the room were very easily taught, you know, or like comic book stuff was the main thing actually that I was totally missing. I think it was a good thing in the end that I didn't know anything about this stuff, because then you get to the root of whatever it is that you're pitching, because you have to tell it to like a 5-year-old person, me. And then that gave me the freedom to sort of find my niche in the room and maybe talk more about emotional drives and and family stuff more than other people would be.
Are there forbidden topics? Are there hacky topics, frequently pitched ideas, things to avoid?
We were not encouraged to go back and like find another Meeseeks episode, because that's just too tunnel vision for finding a good episode of the show, and probably because there's 70 episodes left of the show. It's like you don't want to go back to the well necessarily. There is so much more to find and more to create that don't narrow your view by thinking, well, what do I have to go back and answer? And like, there's time for all that stuff. So I think maybe not that was forbidden, but I think that wasn't really a priority necessarily to go back. And then it turns out in my episode, like Mr. Poopy Butthole comes back. But that wasn't ever like, well, we got to find a way for him to come back. Like, people are going to be wondering. Like, it just sort of naturally happened that way.
How did Mr. Poopy Butthole come back?
That was something that came after I wrote that. He was not in my draft at all, I'll tell you that. And then Dan's just sort of like genius mind came up with this idea that maybe he was in a former crew of Rick's, and Rick is coming along to get some help from some old friends. I mean, that's totally him.
What things stand out? What contributions of yours stand out? Tooting your own horn here. What are some of the things that you're proud of in it?
I mean, I would say I'm proud of the sort of general concept of this episode, which is that Rick and Morty go to a crew convention. If I'm remembering correctly, I think I pitched that they're at a convention, whereas previously it was Rick and Morty were just sort of on their own, finding heists and completing the heists. And then when things sort of turned and we decided that we wanted Rick to hate heists and all that they stand for, and he wants to take down the system, the idea of a convention came up. And so that was really exciting to talk through in the room, just like what sort of events would be taking place at a heist convention and all that stuff. I mean, I think it's really fun to see Rick getting crews together, and you can sort of, I think it's fun for fans to see these characters we've never seen before and imagine how Rick would have met these people. And like the dude who works in the volcano, I think is so funny, because like you can just imagine a whole backstory of like how that guy came to work in a volcano. Like, what a tough life. All that stuff, those characters, I think, feel whole enough that you can sort of think about them more in your own time, if that makes sense.
Elon Tusk?
Elon Tusk is hilarious.
Who does that voice?
Is it Elon Musk?
I was wondering if it is. I was going to ask you.
I didn't know.
I don't know
I think
either.
it is. I think they
Seemed like it would be.
Yeah, I mean, he loves the show, so I think the last time I had seen it, it was just like a scratch.
Yeah.
I think it was just Dan doing it, but then, yeah, when I was watching it, I was like, that's not Dan. I think that's Elon Musk.
Ventriloquiver?
Ventriloquiver is the coolest. She's my favorite character. I mean, that's just such a brilliant thing that Dan came up with probably in like 30 seconds in his brain, and put it down, and it's so cool. You shoot a quiver and then her voice comes out of your mouth.
Miles Knightley?
Miles Knightley was really fun too. That was like something that we discussed a lot in the room. First of all, coming up with his name, he's Danny Ocean. So we were like, what sounds like Danny Ocean that isn't Danny Ocean? So we went through a lot of those. And then Miles Knightley sort of came out on top. But so awesome that Justin Thoreau did the voice for that.
How do you write the profanity in? Lots of fucks in this episode.
Yeah, I mean, the cool thing about writing the show is that you can kind of let the fucks fly. Yeah. And the way that I write is that I definitely, I use a lot of F words in my life, I guess. And yeah, being aware that Rick does all this, you can just go for it and then deal with it later, I guess.
Is there an evolution of the show, of these characters from the early seasons that you see? Or that you were instructed to see, maybe?
I don't think we were really instructed to... we didn't come in day one with like, so by the end of the season, Beth is going to be, it was just like, let the ideas fly sort of thing. And then you find that you talk a lot about character motivations. And I think Morty more than Rick. I think Rick is an old dude who is set in his ways pretty much. I mean, people can always evolve, but I think we were more, in terms of evolving characters, talking about Morty and just becoming more confident and knowing who he is and being able to challenge Rick. I think that's not something that we intended to hit on the head necessarily, but something that came in more and more in discussions that, I don't know, maybe we'll see when the episodes air, but.
Morty's agency.
Yeah, I think so.
Have you been to Comic-Con?
I have not.
Oh. Now it'll probably have new meaning to you.
Yeah. Oh, with HeistCon and everything.
Right.
I know I should have gone to Comic-Con as research, but the timing didn't work up. No, I would love to. Well, I don't know. That's actually a stretch. I don't know if I'd love to go to Comic-Con. It's sort of not my vibe just because I have an aversion to lots of people. But it would be cool to go sometime.
Well, congratulations on this is got to be a huge milestone for your career.
It really is. It really. I mean, the show has given me everything that I have now. I'm so grateful to have worked on it, and it honestly feels insane. Even though I worked here for many months and we're here now and the episode is airing, it feels crazy to say that there's an episode of Rick and Morty with my name on it.
Elisa Phillips is a character designer.
So one of the standout characters I designed was Angie Flint. I always want to say Laura Dern because that's who we based her on.
Uh-huh.
So they started with kind of a vague description of what she was. They're like, yeah, she's outdoorsy. She's strong. She's burly. And so I was thinking, okay, like a dwarf or something, or like someone stout and strong. Like I was kind of thinking like a World of Warcraft dwarf, or we'll say an MMO type character dwarf. But then the first pass, it was like, no, we want something a little more like Lara Croft. So I did a bunch of kind of Lara Croft alternate designs, and then they're like, well, no, like Laura Dern. And I'm like, oh, okay, now that's very specific. So we kept getting more honed in. So then that one was like just 3 kind of caricatures of her. But at least at that point, I already knew what kind of body type they liked and what kind of stature. So it was a lot easier to kind of hone it in at that point. So, and she's not a very big character, but she has a name and she seems really important when you meet her. So that's the kind of stuff we'll usually get, is kind of like it's a throwaway character, but it comes with a lot of importance when they show up. I did kind of like a butler type alien that had kind of some butler elements integrated into his design. He was also kind of like a slug, and he was pushing a cart that had an alien like hiding in the cart. But then it turns out when we design all these fun gags as characters, they get kind of lost. Like they're like, okay, well, we can only have one character on the lineup. So then by the time it gets through the process, no more cart, no more hiding alien. Now it's just the first design. I had an alien he was like a hacker type, like a nerd. So he had 3 arms, 1 arm coming out of his chest holding a laptop, and the other 2 arms in normal place, just typing on the laptop. And then I had to put all the arms straight down for the model. So did that, and then the art director sees it and says, let's just nix this middle arm. And then I'm like, well, that was the joke, but okay.
You can't take it personally, I guess. No,
it's just that, we're not really the writers. We just kind of get in funny things where we can. Sometimes it's like lost in the process, but it's just like you see what you can get in. Not everything makes it. This isn't really the pipeline, like the way that those things get in anyway. It would be more if it was in the board phase that kind of stuff would get in, because it would have to be in the acting. So we were trying to inspire the board artists to maybe integrate that when they see it.
So the character design comes before the storyboard?
Occasionally, if it's main characters, they do. Background characters can be a lot more, like they can kind of just use generic reuse aliens to populate a scene, and then we can kind of design a few more new ones. Otherwise, it would just be too many like specific designs to place initially. So they call out like we need this many incidental aliens, like background aliens, but they really, for the important characters, like the ones with names, the ones that act, those are the ones that we have to focus on before writing, before boards. I think it'll be great to see a whole space populated by like all of our dumb ideas kind of floating around. One specific design that's pretty featured on the Heist episode is when they're walking into the convention and there's this kind of spider looking dude he's hanging from a string and he's making holes in the glass, and he's like right up in the camera, and then you see Rick and Morty walking in the distance. So that's one of my designs. He has some interesting color choices also that people might enjoy. I don't take credit for that because I only did the design, but he's a really fun character.
Corey Booth is a color designer.
Heist is a funny one. Just when you think you got it figured out, it heists you and you don't know what's going on. Miles Knightley the Freddie Mercury inspired villain.
Right.
He was fun to paint. Stuff like that. It is fun because there's all those references. Like I'm into music like 60s, 70s rock and roll, blues, and I try to like let that sometimes inspire me. So when I get characters like the Freddie Mercury looking guy, I see how much I can push that and carry that into
He's
the designs.
actual reference.
Yeah, it's kind of like the George Clooney from the Ocean's 11 stuff, but mixed with like Freddie Mercury's costume. So he's kind of like a blue vampire guy. But what's fun too is like he gets ripped apart, and so some of like our input is like I thought it'd be funny if he had gold bones, just because he's some super highfalutin guy, and he gets ripped apart, and it's just a visual gag. But it's stuff that I get to sneak my personality in and do stuff like that. And they're small little things, but it keeps the job fun.
The Horowitz skull.
The Horowitz skull. That would be the crystal skull that is heisted. Yeah, that is a fun scene.
Lots of one-off characters in here. Glar.
Yeah, lots of, exactly. And that's another thing that's going to be fun to see people cosplay, is because there's so many characters in all these episodes that are background characters or main characters, and it's
Angie Flint, Trucula.
Yeah, Trucula's good. The microwave guy who's built with heat wave, I think his name was. He's just two microwaves stacked on top of each other. Hephaestus is good.
Heistatron, Randatron.
Yeah.
Ventriloquiver. Elon Tusk.
Elon Tusk. Yeah, that was a fun one. And originally, we didn't know if it was going to be Elon doing the voice or not, and sure enough, an animatic showed up with his voice in there.
Yeah.
It's pretty fun.
That's
I painted
cool.
that guy.
He did.
Yeah.
Here's supervising director Wes Archer.
It's one of the more ambitious episodes, actually, visually. Miles Knightley was a great character who dies early.
Yes.
And then it just exponentially takes off from there. It was a lot of fun doing the split screen effects and all of the wacky characters in that one.
A lot of characters that make brief appearances, then gone forever.
Yeah, it what pops into my head also is standards and practices whereby the network will red flag humans who have brain splatter or intestinal entrails or skull fragments, things of that nature. We can't really do that, but if it's an alien, we can. And Miles Knightley was very human-like, but he's an alien, and his bones are gold, and he bleeds a weird color blood, so we could do all that stuff.
You just changed the color of it.
Yeah.
Ryan Elders is the show's music composer.
The process for season 4 has been slightly different. I'm still using the same sort of sound palette I've used for the show over the first 3 seasons, but there's a couple episodes, in particular the Heist episode stands out as having almost a completely new genre-specific style of music. In the Heist episode, I had to create kind of a Ocean's 11 sort of a vibe, a little more upbeat and techno-y than what they use, but just to sort of really sell that sort of genre heist film thing that we were going for in that episode. Very different sound than the rest of the episodes in seasons 1 through 3 and any episode in season 4 as well.
What are some of the specifics that you mean when you try to match that sort of sound environment?
Absolutely. It's very funk inspired. So it's usually really up-tempo funk. It's usually sampled drum loops like break beats. A lot of times those songs sample drum loops from old funk records, drum breaks from certain songs where it's just the drums playing, and they'll speed them up and turn them into these like funky up-tempo kind of electronica grooves. the bass. It's very bass heavy. Lots of almost like a spy feel, like we're on a little spy adventure, kind of a little mysterious, and then lots of big, bold, brassy horn section stabs, ba-da-ba-ba-ba-ba, kind of a thing. And that's just like kind of a basic description of the kind of music that you would find in a heist film. And so I had to sort of capture that, but put the sort of Rick and Morty spin on it.
How do you build those? Do you build them by yourself first?
Yeah, everything that I do almost everything I do for the show is what we call in the box. It's all in samplers in my computer. I don't usually use a lot of live players. I'll play guitar and I'll play bass, and I did that for this heist episode. But like a lot of the stuff is just programmed electronic drums and synthesizers, and then I have a sampled horn section that I'll use to kind of create that. And what's cool about the heist music is that those horns don't need to sound like a real funk horn section. They can be manipulated and mixed and mastered. And there's a lot of like record scratchy style studio techniques you can do to make it sound more authentic to that style. And all of that is like in the computer, in the box, as we say. So yeah.
Did you watch these movies and study them, presumably?
Oh yeah, absolutely. One of the ocean scores are all done by this composer David Holmes, who's kind of like, he's really set the tone for these types of movies. And now everybody kind of does that for these sort of heist movies. It's kind of the sound. And his stuff is very heavily based on old 70s funk records and funk scores for movies. So yeah, you got to watch that. In order to nail a genre, you definitely got to watch it. So I did watch at least some scenes on YouTube,
Tommy Scott is a background designer.
The Heist, that was my favorite episode to work on.
Why is that?
Because I was given, this is weird, but I was given the opportunity to pretty much build out the entire convention center.
Wow.
And so I got to play architect. Heistatron is probably my favorite episode because of a few of the physical jokes of Heistatron literally heisting a planet and being both intelligent enough and stupid to assume nobody can see this massive robot heisting an entire planet and trying to pretend that he's a pizza delivery guy. Might be one of my favorite gags we've ever done. But the whole thing about I had a little extra time to work on the convention, and after Robbie designed the exterior, I went all in on the interior, designed a map for it, how it would all work out, using like pieces of like the LA Convention Center and other convention centers throughout the world as physical reference for how these things are laid out. And I made it to where all the rooms technically connect to each other, even if the people who are watching at home don't know that. I put that kind of detail into there for my own sake and for if anyone ever gets to notice it, be like, hey, this all actually works like a real convention center.
Hey, do you also like Robot Chicken or Aqua Teen Hunger Force or Squidbillies or Space Goes Coast to Coast or Tim and Eric or Black Jesus or Too Many Cooks? What about Metalocalypse? The Adult Swim podcast offers deep dive conversations with the creators, cast, and crew behind all the Adult Swim shows you love, hate, or feel indifferent about. We ask a lot of questions, some of them good, and we take requests. Subscribe to the Adult Swim podcast in your podcast app, and you'll get very personal with a lot of interesting people behind some of your favorite Adult Swim shows. Send your requests, comments, or criticisms to adultswimpodcast@gmail.com. And thanks to Dave Bonowitz for editing this, and to Christina Loringer for her help. Thanks to Brian, Katie, Elisa, Corey, Wes, Tommy, and Ryan for chatting with me, and special thanks to Steve Levy for wrangling all these folks. And thank you for listening.